This is Fatal Files, where we explore true crime and mystery cases. Please like and subscribe to ensure you never miss a weekly episode. Today we are looking at the Australian true crime case of Paul Charles Denyer. Can you explain why we have women victims? The police interviewer asked, and the 21-year-old suspect, who had just confessed to 3 savage murders, said, "I just hate them." "I beg your pardon?" the officer said. "I hate them," Denyer repeated. "Those particular girls or women in general?" The officer said, "In general." There have been a large number of cases where violent films and images have been linked to violent acts by perpetrators. Some of these may not have had a casual link, but those wishing to ban them might assert. However, in the case of Denyer, the link seems justified. The film that influenced him was The Stepfather, also known as Stepfather 2: Make Room for Daddy. It was a 1989 horror movie written by John Abervach and directed by Jeff Burr. It starred Terry O'Quinn, later to feature in Lost and Hawaii Five-0. As the murderous stepfather of the title, who breaks out of an asylum and attacks a family, the movie was deemed insufficiently bloody by the studio executives Bob and Harvey Weinstein. They insisted on more gore, more blood being added. According to Denyer, a scene in the film where the stepfather stabs the women in the neck was his guiding pattern for his grisly attacks. Denyer saw that movie at the age of 16, but his desire for violence started way before then. He admitted to police that he had wanted to kill since he was 14. He was born in Campbelltown, New South Wales, Australia, on the 14th of April 1972. He was the son of British immigrants Anthony and Maureen, who had entered Australia only 7 years earlier. He was one of their 6 children and never quite settled when the family moved from Sydney to Melbourne. He was 9 years old when they made the move. He studied at Northbow Primary School and Clayton Technical School, where the family later moved to Longwarren, which was in the area where he began his reign of terror. As a child, he displayed very odd behaviour. The family says that he had a blow to the head when he was very young, and after that he was slashing the throats of his younger sister's toy bears. He also cut the throat of the family's young cat and hung it from the branch of the tree. He also disemboweled another cat and slit the throats of its kittens. He didn't get on with his fellow students after his move, and he was very self-conscious, and he gained a lot of weight in his adolescence. He claimed his father was abusive, although the other members of his family said this was not true. He was arrested at the age of 12 for stealing a car, and 2 months later accused of theft. He was accused also of willful damage and making false reports to emergency services. At the age of 15, he was charged with a rather unusual form of assault, making another boy masturbate in front of a group of other children. He was stalking women for a few years in Frankston area, and an hour or so away from Melbourne. Before his first attack, he threatened the lives of his own brother and sister-in-law, forcing them to flee the country in fear. Denyer wasn't able to hold down a job successfully. He kept getting fired wherever he worked. He did manage to start a relationship with Sharon Johnson, whom he met in 1992. They moved into a flat together in Frankston. But Denyer had a lot of time on his hands because he was unemployed. The next door flat was vandalised and a peeping Tom was reported around the neighbourhood. And then in February 1993, there was an attack on the flat of the other neighbours. Young parents Les and Donna. The next door neighbours Les and Donna had their cat disemboweled and their house broken into, and with the cat blood of the cat, it was used to paint the words, "Donna, you are dead," on the wall. The rest of the apartment had been vandalised, so Donna moved in with her sister, who happened to live next door to Paul Denyer. Denyer's first victim was 18-year-old student Elizabeth Stevens, and she was killed on the 11th of June in 1993. Denyer had walked over to Langwarrin and saw Elizabeth get off the bus. She was by herself. Denyer said he wasn't targeting any particular person. He just wanted to kill someone. So he followed Elizabeth down the road and grabbed her, pushing a fake gun into her face. And he walked along the road as if they were a courting couple. And then he dragged her into Lloyd Park. He knew the wet and rainy night would cover the sounds of her screams. In the park they walked for a while, and then Denyer allowed Elizabeth to urinate, and once they got near the goalposts on the park, he started to strangle her. When she was unconscious, he then stabbed her repeatedly in the throat. And she was still alive, Denyer later confessed. And then she stood up and then walked around and all that. And then just a few steps, I allowed her to walk around some more, but then I grabbed her and then I threw her to the ground and then I stuck my foot over her neck and finished her off. He then sadistically dragged her to the drain and left her there and covered her with branches. The blade of his homemade knife had broken, so he dumped that beside the road. Elizabeth was found the next day in the drain in the pouring rain. And as Denyer had calculated, police were automatically at a disadvantage. Blood and other traces of evidence, as well as footprints, were all washed away. Denyer had left Elizabeth lying face up, with the forensic examiners described as a very small tree branch across her body. Her trousers and underwear hadn't been disturbed, but her upper body was exposed, and there was a massive wound on her throat. Autopsy showed that she had bruises and abrasions on her arms and hands, and they looked like they may have been defensive wounds. The forensic scientists believe that the victim had been rendered unconscious before the killer used the knife on her so violently. After she died, Denyer had cut her on the chest with a distinctive cross pattern, 4 cuts from the breast to the navel and 4 at the right angles to them. This was enough to worry the police, thinking that Satanists might have been involved. But once the rain had stopped, the police would examine the area more closely, and not far from the body they found a blue and white sports bag with school books in them, with Elizabeth's name on them. Homicide detectives were baffled that there seemed to be no motive for Elizabeth's brutal killing. She had left a note for her uncle and aunt who she lived with to say she was going to the library to study and should be back by 8 p.m. Police appealed for witnesses using a mannequin dressed in similar clothes and were able to deduce that she had got a bus from Central Business District in Frankston back towards her home. For a time, police thought they had solved the case, but after a door was slammed in the officer's face that they were carrying out a house-to-house inquiry, when they forced entry into the home, and they saw there was blood throughout the property. It turned out that the owner had simply mutilated himself. The hunt was still going on the night of 8th of July 1993, when Denya had struck again. 41-year-old bank clerk Rosa Toth was grabbed near Seaford Station, 2 stops north of Frankston, in the early evening as she made her way home from work. The attacker said that he had a gun, which he had put to her head. She tried to bribe him with an expensive ring, but he wasn't interested. She knew that she was in for the fight for her life. Denya was able to pull out clumps of her hair, but in return she bit his finger to the bone. When she got the opportunity, she took it and broke free, running into the middle of the road, trying to stop the passing vehicle, but no one stopped. And Denya grabbed her by the hair and told her to shut up, otherwise he would blow her head off. She nodded but managed to escape once again. This time a car did stop and allow Rosa to get in, and Denya fled away into the night. But Denya wasn't satisfied. He returned to Seaford Station and went 1 stop down the line to Canuck, picking out another victim as he crossed the footbridge over the railway track. It was young mother Deborah Firm. She had only given birth less than a fortnight earlier and had gone out to the shop for milk, leaving her baby with a family friend. She left her car unlocked as she popped into the milk bar, not realizing that the man who had been walking behind her was going to hop in her vehicle and hide behind the driver's seat. Paul Denya waited for her to return with her purchase, and then he revealed herself. Deborah panicked and smashed her car into the side of the shop, but Denya pulled his gun once more and told her to drive to an unmade road. It was Taylor's Road in Cranbourne. There he started to strangle her with a black suitcase cord, and where she was barely conscious, he used a homemade aluminium knife to stab her multiple times in the neck and the upper body. Then he dragged her body to a clump of trees and covered it with just a couple of branches. His knife had broken again, so he put the pieces into his pocket and then drove the car away very calmly and dumped it. The next morning he came back to the abandoned vehicle and stole Deborah's purse and her shopping from it, and then burying her handbag in a nearby golf course. But Deborah was reported missing by her partner, and her car was spotted where Denya had left it, over a mile from her home. There was blood on the grass found next to the vehicle. There was blood in the vehicle. And on July the 12th, Deborah's body was found in grazing land near the unmade road 10 miles from her home. Denya left no direct clues, but there was enough evidence to surmise that it was the same attacker that was responsible for both Deborah's and Elizabeth's murders. Police are now worried they have a serial killer on their hands. Sarah McDiarmid disappeared in 1990 for Kenneruck Station, the same place that Denya had travelled when he attacked Deborah. The only clue was a pool of blood, but her body was never found. 25-year-old Michelle Brown's body had been found in 1992. The women of Frankston became frightened, and to go out at night became a risk. Witnesses started to come forward. A tall man had been seen taking items from Deborah's vehicle, and police consulted with these people over the 2 murders. As the investigation continued, Denya struck again. On the night of 30th of July, the body of a 17-year-old Natalie Russell was found. She had reported missing 8 hours earlier. This time, Denya hadn't attacked at random. He He had decided to attack a young woman who was walking down the bike track between two golf courses. Earlier in the day, he had cut holes in the wire fences on either side of the track, large enough for him to be able to pull a body through into the trees. At 2:30 p.m, he lay in wait, carrying his sharpened homemade aluminium knife with a leather strap. Shortly before 3 p.m, he saw Natalie start down the track, dressed in her school uniform. Denya said, "I walked around about 10 yards behind her until I got to the second hole. And just when I got to that hole, I quickly walked up behind her and stuck my left hand over her mouth and held my knife at her throat." But then Denya made his fatal mistake. He cut his thumb with his own blade. He didn't realize that the piece of skin that came away from his thumb had adhered to Natalie's. Natalie struggled. The police officer who found her body was adamant that she put up hell of a fight. Luckily, Natalie desperately managed to break free and started screaming. Denya bellowed at her to shut up and told her he'd kill her if she didn't. And so she said, "What do you want from me?" "And all I want you to do," he said, "is to shut up." So she knelt down and Denya put the strap around her neck and strangled her, but it broke in half. He pushed her head back to cut her throat. "I cut a small cut first," he said, "but then she was bleeding. And then I stuck my fingers into her throat and grabbed her cords and twisted them. And then, as she fainted, I cut her throat again. And then she died slowly. I kicked her body to make sure she was dead. I slashed her face, and then I left her to lie in the dirt." Her mother became alarmed when Natalie didn't come home as usual from the bus. She called the police, and who started an intensive search around 9 p.m. Looking along the bike track that the children used as quick cut-through, they found the holes in the cyclone fence and discovered the body of Natalie. The police realised that the serial killer had become more and more brazen, more of a risk-taker. This was a daytime killing, which he had prepared very carefully on a very well-used track. Around the scene they found small leather straps like those used on binocular cases. They were blood-stained, and within the largest neck wound of Natalie's body there was a piece of skin, and it came from a hand, but it was not Natalie's. An appeal for witnesses was made for anyone seen loitering around the golf course. There was more than 150 detectives who met up at the Bayside police station in Frankston the day after the murder was discovered, and then they began a door-to-door inquiry. Paul Charles Denya's flat was right in the middle of the area where the police had been targeting for investigation. When detectives visited Denya, he was eager to please and very cooperative, but they noticed cuts on his fingers. He was invited to come back to the police station, and the formal questioning began. He confirmed that he was 21 years old and unemployed before being asked to give his latest movements. 20 or so minutes into the questioning, he said that the temperature gauge of his car had been going high, so he had pulled in the opposite side of the golf course to let the engine cool down. Half an hour later, he was asked to explain the long cut on his hand. He said he had caught his hand on the fan of his car. It seems that he had an answer for everything and could remember precisely what he was doing throughout the days of each of the murders, which made the police even more suspicious. He admitted that he was near each of the scenes, but maintained that it was pure coincidence. Then, just before 11 p.m, Denya was asked point blank, "Are you responsible for the deaths of any of these women?" He said no. But while he was at the police station, his flat was searched. The officers brought back knives, pliers, pieces of clothing, along with a set of strapless binoculars from his car. The pliers matched the offcuts of wire that were found on the bike track. About 11:30, the police told Denya that they would need a blood sample or other tissue, and then left him for a few minutes, during which time Denya chatted to the detective on guard about the policeman's Christian faith. It was then that Denya admitted that he was responsible for the murders. He repeated the confession on tape. Over the next few hours, he gave details of the women's deaths in almost a drab monotone. "I just had the feeling, that's all," he said when he was asked why he had killed Elizabeth. "I just wanted to kill, that's all." And he was charged. He was as cooperative telling the truth as he seemed to be spinning his tale, going with the police to the scene of Deborah Furman's murder and explaining exactly what he did and where he had buried her purse, not far from where Natalie was murdered. 3 weeks later, he returned to the bike track and showed how he crept along the grass to attack Natalie. During the time before his trial, forensic psychologist Ian Joplin examined Denya and explained that Denya had a grandiose sense of self-importance. He has a real constant need of attention. He has a feeling of entitlement. He likes to exploit others. He is self-centered and extremely self-absorbed. He loves to find satisfaction in abusing, degrading, and humiliating acts. Paul Denya pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, and on the 20th of December 1993, he was sentenced to life in jail with no minimum term. He successfully appealed the sentence in the Supreme Court, arguing that the minimum period should be set, and despite state opposition, the court upheld the appeal and set a non-parole period of 30 years. In prison, he decided he wanted to be known as Paula and made an application to find out what the rules were about gender reassignment. He wrote to another inmate that he felt like a female from birth, and his crimes were an attempt to destroy those feelings. During 2004, Denya tried to use anti-discrimination laws to force the authorities to allow him to wear makeup, and in June of that year, he underwent a medical assessment by the Department of Human Services by the Director of Mental Health after applying for a sex change. He tried to change his name legally to Paula Denya, but this was not permitted, and according to Australian news reports, he was investigated over 4 prison rapes that took place in 2012. He was still adopting mascara, lip gloss, and homemade nail polish made from paint and glue, as well as a hand-sewn bra in 2013. None of this was permitted in Australian prisons, well, at least officially. Paul Charles Denya will be eligible for parole in December 2003. He could be released just after 51 if he is successful. But the date on it is saying that after many appeals, that the court has decided that Denya will never be released. He will remain in prison all his natural life. Thank you for listening to Fatal Files. Please like and subscribe so you won't miss out on any uploads, as we record and upload once a week. In the meantime, be safe, and I'll see you in the next video.